Hi, everyone. Welcome to Getaway Day. I'm Gautam. This is Mason. And today we are talking about trade deadlines past. We're going to take a dive through history and look at some of the strategies employed by teams that have done well in the playoffs, won the World Series, and then try to compare them to the contenders of 2023 and see how their deadlines kind of match up and compare. And we're also going to answer some other questions about what does history say about the Astros' attempt to go back to back? That's kind of an intriguing question that we're going to get into. Um, Before we get started, um, we're going to do some this week in baseball, and we've got a trivia question for you. And what's going on, Mason?
Not a whole lot. As you can see by the headwear I am donning today, I have visited a new stadium. I would like to talk about that a little bit whenever we get to this week in baseball. But had a really good weekend. Explored some of the Central Valley and the Bay Area here in California. So I'm having a good time. How are you?
I am great. Another week of baseball ahead of us. I'm getting a little nervous that the season's like only got 8 weeks left in it though, so got to enjoy them all. Okay, so let's get started by doing some this week in baseball. And the first thing that has been the talk of baseball this week has been Tim Anderson versus Jose Ramirez in a absolute brawl that took place over the weekend between the two players.
Yeah, this is the new version of Jose Bautista versus Rougned Odor, and I think maybe
Yeah,
a little bit
and
bigger than that even. So
yeah. So if you haven't heard what happened, Jose Ramirez was the batter. He hit a double. He was running to second base. He slid into the base. Tim Anderson of the White Sox was there, laid down the tag late, and not super unusual of a play. Then things just escalated very quickly from there, and Anderson maybe was kind of standing over him for just a quick second. Ramirez popped up. Um, Anderson just drops his glove in the ball and raises his fist and
th-
just starts
th-
going at.
there was a little bit more than that. J Ram kind of taps him up a little bit close to the nether regions to get him off of him, to get him off the base so that J Ram could get up. They then had some words with the umpire between them. J Ram reaches over and hits him on the hat. And then at that point, the umpire just got out of the way. And then Tim Anderson dropped his glove in the ball and just went ham.
Yeah,
Which he landed what, two punches, and J Ram's being pulled back by some people, and then he just gets Tim right in the side of the jaw and puts him on his back in the dirt. It was it was wild. And then there was about 2 more minutes of just insanity after that. Um, Benches cleared, I think, twice before the play even resumed. Um, there were a couple suspensions handed out today. Um, both managers got a 1 game suspension. The bench coach, I think, for the Guardians got a 1 game suspension. Emmanuel Clase got a 1 game suspension. Then Tim Anderson and Jose Ramirez, they got 6 games for Tim and 3 for Jose, which I disagree with wholeheartedly. I really think that with that situation, Tim threw the first punch. Yes. 6 games, I'm fine with it. J Ram was definitely instigating that fight. He was saying some things that I wish we could know what was said, but unfortunately, we never will. But his statement after the game of he was just telling Tim that he was disrespecting the game of baseball, that's BS. Because that does not then escalate to punches thrown. There was some other things said and probably less politically yeah, less professional ways, I think is maybe the way to say it. Uh, and he got a known hothead hot. I feel like he was probably expecting it to get a little bit more physical. And then he also threw punches, knocked him out. So really, they deserve the same suspension. I have no issues giving Tim Anderson a 6 game, but the fact that J Ram only got 3 really, really irks me because it's kind of like they're giving him a pass, and you know that he played a bigger role in that than they're really punishing him for.
Yeah,
So
I'm actually surprised that they were so low. I thought both would get like longer suspensions, like 10-game suspensions.
So if I remember right, the Rougned Odor and Jose Bautista ended up being 8 games for Rugi and 1 game for Bautista, but Bautista did not throw a punch in return. So that makes a little bit more sense. Um, but the other thing, and this is unrelated to the suspensions, but the other thing that really, really bothers me about this is both the public and the Guardians franchise is acting like J Ram was a hero in this moment. They're celebrating him for knocking a guy out on the baseball field on national TV and essentially glorifying violence. Like there's the minor league team or the minor league single A team for the Guardians is having a Jose Ramirez Appreciation Week where they are having a uh, any fan named Tim gets a free ticket to sit in the grass. If you wear your J
I
Ram
don't think
jersey, you get a free something they're calling a Bam Bam at one of their concessions. What's the other thing? They're having a home run punch derby, and then they also have the arcade game Knockout that they're bringing in. Like this is just entirely unprofessional. Glorifying violence like this on the field. Like they need to step up and actually suspend these guys and say this is not okay. We cannot be doing this on national TV. This is not hockey. It's
I
absolutely
totally agree.
ridiculous.
There's no space for fighting. Baseball's a non-contact sport. Like that shouldn't happen at all.
Yeah, and so I really, really hope that the Guardians and their minor league affiliate are fined for doing this because this is just unacceptable.
Totally agree. Okay, let's move on to some actual baseball stuff. Angels, the team that we kind of applauded for going all in last week on the trade deadline. They've lost every single game that they've played since then. They're 2-8 in their last 10 since they basically announced that they were not trading Shohei. They have played really tough teams, but they just got swept over the weekend by Seattle, who is their direct competitor in their division and in the wild card. They're now 7 games back in the wild card hunt, and each day the probability is dwindling that they'll actually be able to pull this off. Like, what do we think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very glad that they tried to go for it because this is the last time, as I said last week, this is the last time that we're probably going to see Otani and Trout on the field together on the same team. There is a chance Otani goes back, but I think the worse this second half goes, the less likely that is. But they are now 7 back in the wild card. They are behind Seattle. They are behind Boston and New York. And those are the teams that don't even have a wild card spot yet. So they're going to have to pass all of them and one of Tampa, Toronto, or Houston just to make the playoffs. And so this 6 game skid is really really hurting their chances of being able to make something in the season. Like what's been going on? Like are they not hitting? Or are they not pitching well? Like what is happening here?
It's just like a combination of different stuff every day. I feel like there was one game where Carlos Estevez, who's been amazing as a closer all year, gives up a grand slam to win it for one of the wins by Seattle. I mean, a couple games they've just had bad starting performances by their pitchers. Other games they haven't really got the offense going. It's just been not consistent baseball. They were playing a lot better right after the All-Star break that led up to the decision to go buy. And then it's just they've just fallen flat on their face. At some point, it's just like it's make or break week for the Angels this week.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's going to
Um,
be interesting to see if they can turn around here, but they should be getting Trout
there's
back
a
at
lot of
some point,
other
right?
supposed contenders that have also had really bad weeks, specifically in the National League. You've got Cincinnati, Miami, and Arizona all on long, long losing streaks. With the Reds having lost 6 games in a row, Arizona's lost 6 in a row, Miami's lost 4 in a row. Um, we have to kind of step back and remember while these are playoff contenders, they're not really um, teams that don't have like a bunch of flaws, and they absolutely are flawed teams, and they're not running away with their divisions or anything. It's just going to be kind of a glob of teams, and no one's really probably going to separate themselves, is what I would guess.
Yeah. And like with Arizona specifically, like it a lot of their young guys who were excelling really early on in the season are they're not bad by any means right now, but they've come back to earth and they're not on those absolutely torrid tears. Corbin Carroll is the main one that comes to mind. Like he's been okay in the second half, but he's not been amazing. And he was an MVP candidate in the first half. And so with him kind of coming back down to earth, like it's really been really been hurting the team, and they're actually back down instead of leading the division, which they were for a while this year. They are now
Yeah,
one game over 500. 2-8 in their last 10, lost 6 in a row. They're a game and a half out of the wild card and 9 games out of the division. Like they have fallen off a lot here in the second half. So
yeah, and I'll say pretty much the same thing about Cincinnati, that they looked like the hot team there for a while, and then they've just their their starting pitchers are just getting crushed every night, and that's like the direct result. It feels like the direct result of them not going out and doing anything at the trade deadline to improve their pitching. So,
yeah.
uh, yeah. Okay. So, reverse boycott number 2. Tell us about that.
Oh yeah, so I was just in Oakland here on Saturday for the first game of the Bay Bridge series against the San Francisco Giants. And as part of that, the A's fans and the Giants fans combined organized a second reverse boycott, which is for those of you that don't really know what the reverse boycott was the first time, basically Oakland fans don't show up most games because the product that the ownership is putting on the field is not worth paying for. Period. End of story. He's cut all the fan favorites from the team or traded them away. He's fielding a non competitive roster that is currently on pace for the second worst record of all time. And so the fans don't show up. And the ownership and the commissioner are using that as direct evidence as to why they need to move from Oakland. So the reverse boycott is basically saying, let's pack the place and then show them we're here if you actually try and put something together that shows us you want us to come to the game. Because right now, they don't. And so the first game was a Tuesday against the Rays. They brought 27,000 fans into that stadium. And this season, they're averaging 8,000. They have had 4 games where they've had less than 3,000 fans in a game. So 27,000 fans is a ton for that team this year. And the commissioner looked at it and said, oh, great. They got to the average major league attendance for this season, which is a load of crap because they did it on a Tuesday against the Rays. Like, that's a big turnout for that game. Um, but this one was a Saturday. It was against the Giants, who are in a wild card spot with a 3 game lead before they lose it. They're literally 5 minutes away by the bridge. And there were 37,000 people in the stadium, 10,000 more than the other reverse boycott, which was the highest attended game by about 10,000 this year. So it's absolutely insane. The sell the team chants were going on basically throughout the game, and they were loud. And there were a lot of signs. They handed out rally towels before you entered the stadium, and then there was the stadium giveaway because obviously Fisher's not going to give away sell the team towels. Um, but it was really really cool, and being there, more than half the fans were wearing green. So A's fans showed up, and I was really, really impressed. And I really, really hope that more people take a look at that situation and realize how much MLB and John Fisher. I keep wanting to say Jeff Fisher. They're both the epitome of mediocrity, so whatever. Um, but yeah, I really want other fans from other teams to see that, realize what is happening, and that they are being lied to by the commissioner and the ownership, and help fight to keep baseball in Oakland because it is a really good baseball town. And with a steward that appreciates the city and the sport, I think it could thrive.
That's a good point about the message that's being delivered to the fans. I mean, whether you like him or not, Manfred, he's the face of baseball, and he is definitely controlling the message here.
Hmm.
And it's going to be Manfred's legacy, probably. Uh, you know, other stuff too, but the relocation of the A's franchise, the Oakland franchise, is going to be a major part of that. And it's too bad. Like, clearly, they have passionate fans. I'm sure you spoke with some of them at the game, and
I
they're
spoke with a lot of
they're
them.
into their team. And
I spoke with the employees at the stadium. And obviously if the team moves, they lose their jobs. So yeah, they're going to want the team to stay too. But like one of them I talked to for probably 30 minutes to the same guy, just about all of it. And it's insane how passionate those folks are. Like, build the Howard Terminal Stadium. It would be gorgeous out
only,
there.
yeah, I was going to say the only like slimmer sliver of hope is that John Fisher has a tendency to not like close these deals. Nothing is final at this point. They are
Well,
not 100% moving.
they already tore up the designs for the stadium that they had drawn. And so Bally's can't move forward on any of their project because they have to figure out how much land the A's actually need. So the A's had an agreement, had a plan, tore up the plan after they got the agreement, and now the other partner is just waiting. So there is a chance that this falls through and Jeff or John Fisher pulls another John Fisher. And I would love that, honestly, because if he doesn't have a solution by the end of this year, he loses the revenue sharing and a whole bunch of stuff. So that'd be fun. I hope that that's a thing.
Yeah. I totally agree with you, except on one point that John Fisher is mediocre. He's well below mediocre.
Yeah, that's fair. So you're saying that I'm actually accidentally complimenting him by calling him Jeff Fisher,
Yeah, you gave him a big compliment there.
but I'm trashing Jeff Fisher when I. So I'm torn because I also don't
Different
like Jeff
scales.
Fisher.
Yeah.
Uh,
But he's actually mediocre.
exactly. 7-9, 8-8. All right, cool. What else we got?
We got a couple other players that we want to highlight here this week. The first being rookie Davis Schneider. Who's David Schneider, you may be asking? And I was asking myself the same question a couple of days ago. He's got a very full mustache, and he started his big league career with a just a casual 9 hits and 13 at bats with 2 home runs. And been playing second base for the Blue Jays the last 3 days. So um, You got anything on Davis Schneider? What an insane start to a career.
Yeah, he actually today was the first time that he did not have a hit. He went 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts. Actually, I'm not even sure if the game's over. It's probably over, right? It's 9 o'clock Eastern. I don't know.
I
But
know.
at least so far today, he is 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts. So this is the first time that he has struggled so far in his major league career. But it's really cool to see from Davis Schneider because he was the 28th ranked prospect for the Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay. Wow. I messed that up big. The 28th overall prospect for the Toronto Blue Jays. So seeing a guy who's not a non-prospect, but a pretty low prospect that most people have no idea who he is, come up and have this immediate success and kind of get some hype around his name, that's really cool. It's not something that you see
Yeah.
every day.
He's a 28th round pick and he's having a career season at AAA. So he absolutely deserves a promotion. And sometimes these unheralded guys can actually become really good players. So keep an eye on him. Another player who is nothing like Davis Schneider in terms of his career path is CJ Abrams. You've got a tweet here from Foolish Baseball. CJ Abrams, since July 1st, he's played 30 games with a slash line of 322, 376, 504, 14% strikeout rate, 6% walk rate with 4 home runs, and 18 for 18 in stolen bases. Um, so CJ Abrams seems like he's putting everything together. I've been always mentioning the fact that he barely had any time in the minor leagues. He only played 114 games in his minor league career. He's only played 193 um, in the majors. Yet he's only 22 years old. So it was bound to take a little bit of time before he really hit the ground running, and now it seems like he's there.
Yeah, and the biggest thing to me is that with his breakout, he's up to 1.6 F4. You look at the other big guy that they got in the trade back for Juan Soto, that is currently in the majors, in Mackenzie Gore, and they're both having really solid seasons. And with this kind of recent
Totally.
30-day breakout of CJ Abrams, you're starting to see what the future for the Nationals might actually be, and it's kind of exciting. Like, I won't lie to you, it with Mackenzie Gore, with Josiah Gray, with CJ Abrams. James Wood hit an absolutely massive home run down in AAA here the other day that I think went over the batter's eye or something. It was a monster home run. Um, but you're starting to see the rebuild from the Nationals come around, I think, a lot quicker than some people expected, and they're starting to get some really good, valuable pieces out of it. So,
Yep. It's been actually a really encouraging year for the Nationals for a rebuilding team. Obviously, they're not doing well in the standings, but I would say overall it's been a great year for them.
yeah, agreed. All right.
Okay, what do you say we do a trivia question here and then get into our main topic?
Let's do it. So, I wanted to kind of do a trivia question that you guys, the listeners, would answer. So, this is not a question for Gautam. You are not going to get the answer in this episode. Instead, I want you to go on social media and tell me the answer, and we will reveal it next week on the podcast. So, the question is this: Ronald Acuna Jr. right now is on pace for 37 home runs and 79 steals. I I wanted to stretch it to 80, but technically he is only on pace for 79 steals. So we're going with that. He would then become the third player all time to have more than 13 home runs and steal 79 bases. Who are the other two players who have done that? And if you can give me the number of home runs that they had, that would be an extra bonus. So just to repeat that, players with 79 or more steals, and I guess I should have phrased it 14 or more home runs. So if we'll go ahead and tweet that out here right after the pod is over, and see if you guys can answer that question for us, and we will let you know the answer next week.
Sounds good. Okay, so trade deadline is behind us. We've got 8 weeks of season left, and we wanted to take a look at what some recent champions, specifically like the last 10 years, with some other interesting teams mixed in, have done at the trade deadline. And what does the deadline actually mean? I feel like it gets a ton of hype these days. There's pretty much like 24/7 coverage of the trade deadline for months, actually. And does it really matter, or are these just kind of incremental changes that don't need this type of like attention, really?
So I think it depends on what time frame you're looking at, because now I would argue it actually does have a pretty big impact. Because the trade deadline is July 31st. You trade up to then. After that date, no more trades. There can you can like DFA a guy and then make a trade on that, but like, so I guess I'm not really sure what the actual distinction is as far as, is it
I think you can make minor league trades now
okay? So is it
still.
40-man roster trades? Is that what it is?
Yeah, I don't think you can do that anymore.
Okay, so this is the deadline to make trades of guys on the 40-man roster. I think you can still have trades that you'll see happen for minor leaguers. But prior to 2019, there were actually two trade deadlines each year. There was the July deadline, which was exactly what we just described. And then there was the August waiver trade deadline, which meant you could still trade a player, but he had to get through waivers and teams could claim him. And then I'm trying to remember. So if someone claimed him,
They had two options. They could either take his entire contract or they could work out a trade, basically.
okay, yeah. So that was how the trade deadline worked for years and years and years. Actually, I think since 1983 is when that became a thing. And that second deadline on August 31st ended in 2019. So that's where we're at today. And so you kind of look back, and if you're looking 2019 to now, you might see that like the guys who get traded amass more war with their team or bigger stats with their team than some of the guys that were traded at the deadline in 1992, for instance, whenever they were really only
Yeah,
on the
but
team for a month.
the thing to mention with that is that there are not a lot of examples of huge waiver deadline trades. I would say the
Yes.
bigger trades happen at the traditional July 31st deadline. One big example of a waiver trade deadline is 2017 Justin Verlander, who got traded to Houston from Detroit. I think that's an interesting place to start with. That deal was ended up being massive, obviously for Houston because they ended up winning the World Series, and um, it was a really unusual trade though because Verlander was having kind of a down season. Um, wasn't the same guy. I feel like that was a incredibly rare occurrence, but in recent years we've also seen a number of superstar players that are actually getting moved at deadlines because the trade deadline has definitely changed a lot over the years.
Yeah. Um, but the another example of a, I won't hang out on this one too long because it didn't actually happen. But like when Bryce Harper was potentially getting traded in 2018, it was at that second waiver deadline. So he was actually put on waivers. I think he was claimed, and then they revoked him off of waivers, and decided
Yeah.
not to trade him. So yeah, that's always a really weird one. And there's always guys that are kind of floated out there or were floated out there that were usually revoked because the trades weren't really all that great. But so where shall we start? I think
Um, I guess maybe we should start by looking back at kind of what are the major types of trades that are going down at these deadlines by teams? Like, well, what are the strategies that the teams are actually employing for trade deadlines, and how does that compare to what teams did this year? Can we find any matches?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit difficult to describe because there's a couple different things you could do. It's like teams usually look at upgrading one group, be it your lineup, your bench, your starting or your starters or your bullpen. They could look at one of those and decide we're going all in here and just upgrade the bullpen and go out and try and get as many arms as they can of good arms and just add a bunch of depth of all just kind of middle middle relief guys or not middle relief but not your superstars, not your absolute scrubs, but go and build a bullpen. You'll see other teams that go, we struggle to get through the sixth inning. So we're going to go out, we're going to get starters. That's kind of what the Cardinals did here about, what was it, 2 years ago when they went out and got John Lester. They went and got um, Jay Happ. And helped just try and fill the rotation with innings eaters. And then you'll have some teams that want to upgrade their bench. But then you have every once in a while, you'll see a team go out and try and get an absolute superstar, one guy that could make or break their team for the postseason. And then you do also have the others where they don't pick a group, they do a hodgepodge. So I think really the way to describe it is there's like five different things. You can upgrade the bullpen a little bit, upgrade starter depth or your rotation a little bit, your bench a little bit. You could add an absolute superstar, but you're probably not going to do a whole lot else. Or you make a move for this group, a move for that group, a move for that group. And that tends to be what you would see, I think, boiling it down to five.
I think that's definitely the way to think about it. The bullpen one is the easiest to describe because I think it's the one that happens the most, where a team they'll make a couple incremental upgrades to their bullpen, just makes their bullpen deeper. They'll have basically their if you get like a middle innings guy or a seventh inning guy, then you push the whole bullpen back basically or forward, whatever way you want to think about it. You turn your regular seventh inning guy into your sixth inning guy, and it just makes it one man deeper. And 2021, the Astros are the perfect example of this. They went out and they swapped relievers with Seattle. They added Kendall Graveman, Rafael Montero. They brought in Jimmy Garcia, Phil Maton, and that was just their way of strengthening the bullpen on what was clearly a very um, impressive team all around. They didn't really need to go out and get an ace starting pitcher or like a big hitter or anything. They were a good team, and that's what we've seen. I think a lot of over the last 10 years, where these teams are already good. The teams that end up going deep into the playoffs, winning the World Series, they're actually strong teams. They're not patching 100 different holes like the New York Yankees in 2023. They're they're putting the finishing pieces on it, and that could be just bullpen. So that's that strategy. Um,
Yeah, and the 2019 Nationals are actually another good example of this because all of the substantial moves they made at the deadline were addressing their bullpen, getting Daniel Hudson, getting Hunter Strickland, getting Rowanus Elias. Like they added what about a half a WAR to their bullpen there for the like last 2 months of the season, and then ended up getting in on a wild card and winning the World Series. So
yeah, that's totally an interesting team because that was a team that started so poorly. They were incredibly talented, and they were showing that they were headed in the right direction. So they didn't need to go out and get a big bat or anything. They had it all internally. So they just addressed their biggest weakness, which might have been their bullpen, and that ended up playing a role in the World Series run. Daniel Hudson close out the World Series win. So sometimes those kind of moves pay off, even though they feel like they're kind of small and they feel kind of underwhelming at the time. Um, what teams like went out and just did bullpen? I think number one example of that is the Braves, which are just like the 21 Astros and the 19 Nationals, where they're a phenomenal team. They're the best team in the majors by record right now. Their lineup 1 through 9 is phenomenal. Good starting pitching, and then they added to that. They added Yanni Chirinos, but then they also added two bullpen guys, Pierce Johnson, Brad Hand, and I don't think anyone has any issues with what the Braves did in this deadline because what do you do when your team is in that position? You don't really need to break the bank to improve.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you can go out and upgrade that lineup. So like, might as well go in and try and get some fresh arms for your bullpen and try and help keep the leads that you're building with that absolutely stellar lineup.
Uh,
Let's see. I think well, technically the Reds only upgraded their bullpen, but I don't, or only, I wouldn't even say upgraded. The Reds only addressed their bullpen, but they only made one trade at the entire deadline. So, I,
yeah, that
like,
that one that one feels a lot different. That feels like they didn't really commit to this season at all. They just didn't do much to improve. Getting one
yeah,
like mid-tier bullpen arm is not really. You can't compare. Like you can compare it to some teams in history, right? Like the 2019 Nationals, really really good team that ended up winning, more than 63% of their games that season. They didn't make a single move at the trade deadline that year.
Wh-
That
which
feels
which
like
team were you talking about?
the 2019 Yankees.
Yankees. Yes, I thought you said Nationals.
Yes.
I was
I
very
might have said
confused.
Nationals, my bad.
Yeah, but yeah, like
But
the
yeah.
Yankees legitimately made zero trades. The 2019 Cardinals went out. The only thing they did was traded away Jed Jerko for guys who did not play that season, and Tony Cingrani, who was hurt, and someone else who I think was in the minors. Like,
So,
it's
those are the rare examples of teams that don't end up making a whole lot of moves. And they're for a couple different reasons, I feel like. One is they feel like they have a really strong team. Like the 2019 Cardinals were surging there in the second half. They got all their help that they needed internally. They didn't necessarily need to go out and make a big splashy move. The Reds are maybe that team, maybe they could be that team, but they don't really feel like they are so flawless that they couldn't use some big upgrades here. Like clearly, they need some help in their pitching staff.
it feels like they just didn't want to part with the big prospects they would have to part with to upgrade the rotation midseason.
But at some point, that prospect hoarding becomes a problem. Like, what's the point of it if you're not going to try to win when the Cardinals are down, when the Brewers and the Cubs are not world beaters? Like this is you can't just pass up the seasons.
Yes, but we also did just get done talking about how the Reds immediately following the deadline quit hitting too, and they've lost 6 games in a row. Like, this isn't all on the pitching staff. Like, the entire team's been struggling here since the
Hey,
deadline,
they
and
gave
so
up 36 runs in 2 games to the Cubs.
yeah, that's true, but I don't think just fixing or getting one guy in the rotation is going to fix that either. I think they have a much bigger issue with their pitching staff. This year was not going to get it done no matter what. So it was, I think they decided that they would be better off waiting until the off season and trying to sign one or two guys who are going to hit the market. So,
Okay, so another kind of interesting archetype of trade deadlines is going out and getting like an ace starting pitcher. I feel like that has happened a lot in recent years and really in the past. And that's like a surefire, clear way you can see hey, this is going to improve our team if we add a number one or number two pitcher to our rotation every 5 days, and he can go out and just give us wins in those starts. Like
And I
the
think the
really famous
prime
one is like CC. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the prime example that everyone is definitely thinking is the 1992 Toronto Blue Jays, who went out and got
I was
David
thinking
Cohn.
about 2008
Oh,
with the
well, that's
Brewers
awkward.
and CC Sabathia.
You're telling me you weren't thinking of David Cohn?
Not really, no.
Oh.
Go ahead with your David Conan though. I want to
Oh.
hear.
No, but like, so that Blue Jays team went out and got David Cohn, and then they got a reliever in Mike Eichhorn or Mark Eichhorn. They added about 1.7 WAR to their team just with those two players alone, and that was actually at the August deadline. And they gave up a couple. They actually gave up Jeff Kent in that deal, um, for David Cohn, which hindsight, it would be really nice to have had Jeff Kent, but they went out and won the World Series that year as well as the start of their back-to-back World Championships. So not a bad situation there to go and trade for the big proven pitcher and then use that to help you get through the rest of the season. When you pair it with a reliever that upgrades your bullpen as well, that reminds me an awful lot of the 2023 Houston Astros. I mean, they went out, they got Verlander back, and then it was who was the reliever? Was it Kendall Graveman again?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and
always
then they got
Kendall
Kendall
Graveman.
Graveman back. So, like, that's kind of exactly the same thing. You go out and get the big pitcher who's not having his absolute greatest season, mind you, but still really good pitcher, pretty good reliever that's going to help you out down the stretch. Boom, World Series.
Yeah, one guy from the mid 2000s that's or the mid 2010s actually that's quite interesting because he got traded back to back deadlines to different teams. Jake Peavy, who was pretty much an ace with the Padres, he got traded to Boston for 2013 stretch run, and then in 14 when he won the World Series with the Red Sox, and then when the Red Sox were really bad in 14, he gets flipped to the Giants, and then he goes on another World Series run and wins that one too. So sometimes that starting pitcher can make a huge difference. As we all know, I think maybe the best trade deadline or like the biggest impact on a team was the 2021 Dodgers acquiring Max Scherzer and Trey Turner because that trade has no comps. Like getting two all-star stud players that actually performed over the next 2 months of the season too. Like you can't really compare that to anything that's happening this year or maybe ever again.
Yeah, like I added up the war accumulated by players acquired at the deadline for that season, and Turner and Scherzer take that award for every team that we've looked at by far, like by 3 WAR. Um, they put up 5.7 combined WAR in the last 2 months of the season with the Dodgers in 2019 or 20. Did I say that right? 20.
2021, 2021.
Yeah, 2021. Sorry. Um,
And that was a
hmm,
107 win team. So
yeah,
they clearly helped that team win all those games.
yeah, but it is incredibly rare for a team to go out and trade for two superstars. I mean, really, it's rare for teams to go out and trade for one superstar. Like it's happened a lot more recently than ever. Because I mean, like you had in 2017 the Verlander trade that we've already talked about. You also had Yu Darvish go to the Dodgers, and that was one of his best seasons. Like that was his best season in Texas, wasn't it? Then he got traded over to the Dodgers.
I think so, yeah.
And then let's see, Machado gets traded to the Dodgers in 18. Then fast forward to 2019, Zach Greinke goes to the Astros. 2021, you have Scherzer and Turner. In 2022, you see the Juan Soto mega trade. So really, 2017 is like when all these big trades started coming about. Um, at least in the 2000s. You did have in the 90s, there were some pretty big ones. Ricky Henderson going to the Blue Jays in 93, Mark McGuire going to the Cardinals in 97. Granted, they weren't really in the playoff hunt in 97. Oh, um, but yeah, so like it's been a recent phenomenon that you've seen all these big superstars getting traded. Um, but there is a little bit to it in the past. But that Scherzer Turner deal that we were talking about, that's a unicorn. I doubt that ever happens again, where a team goes out and gets almost 6 WAR out of 2 players at one trade deadline. Like the only other
Yeah.
team that came even close to matching that from a WAR standpoint is the 2000 Yankees that went out and got David Justice, Jose Vizcaino, Mike Frank, Danny Neagle, Todd Erdos, Glenn Allen Hill, and those guys all combined for 5.8 WAR. But that I named what 58 people there to fill a
Yeah.
25-man
But
roster.
that's an interesting one, but I feel like we can't not mention the 2021 Padres trade deadline. They obviously, we added up the WAR. They made 1.1 WAR with Juan Soto, um, Josh Hader, Josh Bell, Brandon Drury. That was like the biggest trade deadline for one team, other than maybe the Scherzer and um, Turner deadline. It just didn't end up being so impactful for the team. Like, but they
Oh,
actually ended up having a really good season.
yeah, 100%. And there's an entirely different thing if you're looking at a trade over a multi-year period versus just the 2 months at the end of the year that you make the
That's
trade.
very true.
And because like I
Yeah.
was looking at an article from Sarah Lang's just earlier today even, and it was just showing like the highest combined WAR traded in a trade deadline acquisition. And like there's some trades that when you add up the WAR for all those players amasses to like it was like almost 300 WAR for one of the trades combined. But that was career totals for those guys. But then there was another article I was reading that was showing like the just for the time that the players were with those teams, and you have like the Rangers when they got Elvis Andrus and a couple other guys, all at the 2010 deadline, I think. Does that sound right? Like they've had like a combined 48 WAR from the players that they got, 28 of it being from Elvis Andrus. But like so there's different ways to look at it. Really the way I've been looking is just in the two month frame
Yeah,
from
that's I think
trade
that's fair
to
for this
postseason.
conversation. Yeah.
But yeah, so like that Soto Hader trade is huge. It's easily going to go down as one of the biggest trades ever. But as far as what I'm looking at, it actually wasn't really all that impactful because it was only about 1 WAR, whereas some other teams got a lot more value in the immediate return.
Yeah, and specifically, I think we should call out some of those. You can call it like these guys are go down in lore in their team's history because of being trade deadline acquisitions. I think 2021, the Braves, that is like the team that maybe had the most successful trade deadline, not just in terms of like WAR, but what those players did in the postseason, and just how they turned their entire season around the time of the deadline. Obviously, not all the credit goes to the acquisitions: Jorge Soler, Eddie Rosario, Adam Duvall, Jock Peterson, Richard Rodriguez, but they all played a key role in kind of jump starting the team. And I don't know, like teams in 2023 need to look at the 2021 Braves as kind of a blueprint because they're also a part of this new playoff format era where teams that are under 500 or around 500 are going to be contenders. I say that in quotes because the deadline is 2 months before the season. There's a whole jumbled mess. We were talking about it earlier this hour where there's a whole bunch of teams that are in the wild card race, but they're not incredible teams, going out and getting legitimate upgrades at multiple positions can make just such a major difference. And you get hot at the right time, like you can, sky's the limit. So there's some teams that kind of followed a similar blueprint. At least we can kind of make out that they are actually trying to make some very specific upgrades to their team. I think a team like the Brewers did really well at the trade deadline because they clearly have a problem with their lineup and scoring runs. And they go out and they get Mark Canha, Carlos Santana. Those guys are not exciting players, but they're average players, kind of like a Jock Peterson and Eddie Rosario. I feel like they're the team that I'm seeing that matches the Braves right now here.
Yeah, I kind of I think I agree with you there. I think the for teams teams this year, like, wait, hold on. So sorry, I'm looking here at the Diamondbacks. Peterson. Who's Peterson?
Jace Peterson.
Oh,
He's
that
like
is
a
Jace.
utility guy.
Okay.
Yep.
Like, uh, the D-backs kind of along the same lines. I mean, they got Tommy Pham, they got Jace Peterson.
Yeah.
Then they added a bullpen arm and Seawald. But yeah, I think I'm with you where the Brewers are probably the closest comp to that.
I think the Diamondbacks fit in there too. Like they're not flashy upgrades, but they're legitimately going to help the team. I think.
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna get you a lot more consistency. You're not necessarily gonna have the most upside. You didn't just go get Trey Turner, but Tommy Pham is a very, very good player. And he's been a very good player for a very long time. And I think that is legitimate or going to legitimately help them um, kind of turn around what they've this kind of struggle that they've had here the last couple weeks. So let's see. So what I'm curious, what would you this Blue Jays team? They just went out and they basically filled a lot of holes that were caused by recent injuries in getting Jordan Hicks to kind of come and take over for Jordan Romano until he's back. Paul DeYoung to help kind of fill in with Bo being a little bit or tweaking his leg and some other guys kind of struggling a bit. Then Genesis Cabrera coming in to be a big lefty head of the pen for them. Like, is there a good comp that you can think of for them? Because I think that's a really good deadline. Not just because they're all Cardinals. Like, they were the legitimate good pieces for the Cardinals this year. And really, other than Hicks, they're not flashy. Like, Hicks is
I'm not
flashy because
seeing
he can
it.
throw 105.
Do you have a direct comp for them? I'm looking at my list here.
So, to me, it's kind of just that general.
Upgrade all around rather than one
Yeah,
area.
yeah, it kind of reminds me almost of last year's Astros, where you go out, you get Mancini, who is kind of the Paul DeYoung of this here. Um, you get Will Smith. Will Smith is a capable reliever. That kind of reminds me of like a Genesis Cabrera, if he's not, throwing pitches 38 yards outside the zone. Um, but like they remind me of the 22 Astros, but then they also got that big power pitcher in Jordan Hicks, which kind of it puts it a little bit in a different realm here, but I think it's that same kind of thing. Um, is because they did pretty much stick to just their bullpen, and then that one move for the rotation, or not rotation, the one move for the lineup. I think
Yeah,
it
so it wasn't like a huge deadline, but they at least shored up the depth, and I feel like
or
that's the
actually,
common strategy,
you
right?
know what? Probably the 18 Astros is the better comp here, because that's when they went out and got Ozuna, who was a really really good reliever. That's kind of the Jordan Hicks. The Ryan Presley is your Genesis Cabrera, and then Martin Maldonado is a defensive wizard, which is kind of exactly what Paul DeJong is. Paul DeJong's the better bat, so that's actually probably the better comp. Is the 18 Astros.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So I kind of started to address this question earlier, but like out of all these teams that we're talking about, only one of them won the World Series last year. And it is so rare that we have a back-to-back World Series champion, but like this Astros team is quite good at its core. Like you've got Framber Valdez, who just went out and had his no hitter, and he's shown for years that he's a very, very good pitcher. Christian Javier, Luis Garcia, in that staff, and then their lineup with guys like Altuve and Bregman and all them. It's a really, really good team. They won the World Series last year. They're kind of pretty well favored to do it again this year, and then they go out and get Verlander and Graveman. Like uh, I talked about one of these seasons already that I'm going to talk about here again, but I kind of wanted to see like out of the two most recent back to backs, is there like a good comp for that? Like for what the Astros just did. Um, so I guess before I dive into what I've got, do you have any thoughts on it, or do you want me to say my piece first?
Yeah, just that we have to mention that we're only looking through the monocle of the trade deadline, right? We're not really taking into account the other parts of the teams, and that's where things get really complicated with this type of journey that we're going on today.
Yeah, but like with this, like the Blue Jays, the 92-93 Blue Jays, they went back to back. They had a really good core. John Olerud, Roberto Alomar, Joe Carter, Dave Winfield. That to me, in essence, is your Jose Altuve, your Alex Bregman, your Jordan Alvarez, and pick another Astro.
Marwin
Th-
Gonzalez,
well, another current Astro.
Jose Abreu,
I was thinking like,
Kyle Tucker, Kyle
yeah,
Tucker.
Kyle Tucker. That's who I probably should have thought of. Um, but or even the so look at the 92-93 Jays or the 98 to 2000 like um Evil Empire Yankees with their Death Star core of Derek Jeter, Mariano Rivera, Jorge Posada, and Andy Pettitte. Like these are teams that all have like a really, really, really good core. And I don't think anyone would argue that for any of those three teams, right? At the core, these are really good teams. Then you go and look, and the Jays in '92, they added David Cohn and Mark Eichhorn. We talked about that one already. But then in '93, the Jays went out and they added Ricky Henderson, Tony Fernandez, and they actually traded away from some of their bullpen there, but they actually traded away from their bullpen in the areas where it struggled. So they actually gained about 3.6 WAR and lost negative zero point 0.9 WAR. So overall, it's actually a 4.5 WAR swing there for that Blue Jays team that ended up going to repeat. And those are both teams that performed way better after the deadline, raising their win percentage from like a 570 to 590, a 575 to 585. So like that's I think what teams want to do every year. Obviously, you want to get better after you trade them. And like the Yankees are actually a little bit the other direction where they always do a little bit worse after the deadline. And in '98, they really didn't do much. They traded Willie Banks for Jim Bruschi, and that's it. In '99, they traded for Jim Leyritz and gave away like a minor leaguer, and that's it. And both of those seasons, they actually performed worse after the deadline, basically not doing anything. And there's a lot of reasons that could be, but Like it's kind of weird to just look at these three-peat teams and think they didn't really necessarily help themselves at the deadline. Their biggest thing there is the core, but when you look at these, the Blue Jays adding David Cohn and Mark Eichhorn did actually significantly help them raise their win percentage by about point or by about 2.5%. So that's the one to me that kind of stands out and says that maybe Verlander helping shore down the rotation more, cover some more innings, Kendall Graveman to hold their lead. Like they do have the offense to do this, and I think that 92 Jays team is probably the single best comp. And I like it's hard to say that I think the Astros are going to go out and repeat, but I think they do actually have a shot with this lineup the way that it is, or this roster the way that it is.
Yeah, when you were talking about the Yankees moves those first 2 years, you were saying that they dropped off a little bit, but we have to remember these are like they were fantastic teams.
Oh yeah,
Talking
yeah. This
about a 70% 700 winning percentage. It's like
yeah. I guess the 98 Yankees won 114 games, so performing worse after the deadline, which the deadline there is August 31st. So that's 1 month. And but their win percentage came from 726 down to 703. In 99 it came from 618 down to 604. The year that they actually made a ton of moves is the year that they actually probably like they weren't all that good. They were what 87 and something in 2000. They just barely won the division and they still managed to win the World Series for a three-peat. So,
they
evil
needed all
empire.
that
I hate them.
those additions to just make it, and sometimes that's
Yeah.
kind of the goal of the trade deadline. It's not necessarily having a postseason hero or anything. It's literally just let's get the innings we need to make the playoffs, and let's have the bats to fill out our lineup
Well,
here and
I mean, that's
get us
exactly what the
there.
2011 Cardinals did when they went on their run because they were what 15 games back at one point in August, and then at the deadline they got Octavio Dotel, um, Edwin Jackson, Corey Patterson, and Mark Zipchinski all in the exact same trade with the Blue Jays, giving up Miller, Rasmus, Talent, Walters, and Castillo. And then they also got Rafael Furcal from the Dodgers. And that was just to get them to the postseason. And then they went on the magical run. But so that's kind of what that 2000 Yankees team reminds me of. But we're talking about current teams, so maybe I should probably not compare 2011 Cardinals to the 2000 Yankees. Let's see. Any other interesting ones here? So I actually do want to ask you about this. The the Guardians were basically 500 in second place, a game and a half back, and then they go and actually trade away Ahmed Rosario, Aaron Savali, Josh Bell, and they get back a really good prospect for Savali and Kyle Manzardo. But then they get Noah Syndergaard back for Ahmed Rosario. Like that one, there are no comps to that out of
That was a
any
very odd
championship
trade, I
contender.
feel like, for Cleveland. Is that really the best they could get? It doesn't really feel like a buy move. And then definitely trading Savali felt like they're just selling. So they're not like any of the teams we've talked about today that were clearly making an upgrade. This team, it's kind of like an unsure situation what they're really trying to do, and that I don't know. That's
Yeah,
not
because
confidence inspiring at all.
they're definitely still in it for the division. So are they
Right.
giving up, or do they think those are legitimately improving the team right now? Like it's so confusing because if look at any championship series contender in the last 13 years, not a single one of them can I think gave up two former all stars and a really young, controllable pitcher to get back Noah Syndergaard and a prospect.
Yeah,
Like,
for this season, right? That you can't really count on Manzardo. He's hurt, and then
Yeah.
you got back when you traded Rosario, the guy on the expiring contract. You got back another guy who's on an expiring contract. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense here,
Yeah. So
unless, like you said, they thought that that was a legitimate upgrade, which no one else thinks.
I'm not sure that they thought. I think that might be
Yeah,
the problem.
I guess maybe the thing I would say to that is, well, a question I'll ask: do you think the trade deadline now, with so many teams in the playoffs, is actually too early? That maybe it should be the middle of August or something? Because maybe a week from now, on the 15th, maybe like 3 or 4 of the teams will have lost more games and completely basically ended their season,
Well,
dropped out of the race. You have more sellers.
there's a very good chance here in a week the Angels are going to wish they would have traded Otani.
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, it actually with the expanded playoffs, it probably does make sense to move it back a little
Because
bit later. And like, why did
we
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 move it
talked
all the
about
way
almost all
forward
the
anyway?
teams.
Because we used to have
What's
two
that?
deadlines,
Yeah.
and so really the effective deadline was August 31st. So why did we pull it all the way to July 31st instead of leave it in the middle?
Right. It didn't make sense to me. And there's so many teams that didn't really pick a path, or they didn't do much. They just kind of held because they probably really weren't sure whether they're going to be in it or not, and they didn't want to commit one way or the other. So they just picked the middle ground. And I don't know, like that makes for a less interesting deadline and probably less successful deadline, maybe.
But yeah, but like, well, actually, that's an interesting point. Here in the next couple of years, we might actually see more and more teams just straight up hold at the deadline and not buy or sell. Because I mean, we saw that in what the Giants, the Reds, the uh,
The Twins,
yeah, the Twins, the Red Sox. Really, they made moves, but they didn't make moves that are actually improving or tearing apart their team. The Mariners kind of did
the
the same
Mariners had a
thing.
very strange deadline that I feel like can't be compared, because in some ways you could easily make the case that the Mariners were sellers at this deadline. They traded their bullpen ace and they got back some spare part, like unproven guys, and they're going with that. And now they've won 5 games in a row. So
Yeah. So definitely a weird one. And I'd be curious here in the next couple years to see if we see more and more teams just holding, if they're close. Because unless there's like a very, very obvious trade that you can make to help your team, like it almost makes sense to just hold. Now, I would argue the Reds still should not have. Um, but teams like the Giants and the Giants, it's kind of paying off. Like they've already started improving just naturally. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that works moving forward. So I
okay,
think
yeah. So that was a very interesting conversation. Hopefully, we gave you something to think about there. We'd love to hear what you think about the trade deadline strategies. So let us know on Twitter, social media, and we want to interact with you and get
trivia
you engaged.
question, secret phrase,
Yes. And
which
so,
we
with
did
that,
remember to say the secret phrase this week. So make sure to go and tomorrow or on Tuesday, when the post is up asking for the secret phrase, make sure to get your name in there to get entered into the raffle for the end of the month. Make sure to answer the trivia question, and we will reveal that answer next week.
I am Gautam. He is Mason, and we'll talk to you next week. If you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and YouTube to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. Join the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Getaway Day Pod. If you enjoy card collecting, check out our sister YouTube channel at Getaway Day Cards.